Hi everybody. Today's video is going to be a big one. We're going to be working on 3 features that are all kind of connected, or maybe 2, depending on how you look at it. We're going to pause the game with a pause screen. This pause screen will include a system menu. We're not going to hook up this audio stuff until maybe 2 more videos down the road. In addition to the pause screen is going to be this map. And not only is this map working with this current scene that I'm on, you can see the little player indicator that moves with the player, by the way, as we go through the level. So as I get high or to the right, it moves with me. But this map will also respond to areas as we discover them throughout the world. And of course, it's going to be integrated with our save and load system. And to make it even a little bit sweeter, we're going to make it so that you can come into this map UI, add one of these map nodes, and simply assign it a level. And it's going to automatically update to match the size, exit locations, and even display a name here in the UI. But it's going to be really user-friendly and easy for you to work on in development so that you're not pulling your hair out trying to get this map to work. So if you want this complete map solution, then stick around. Hi, my name is Michael. Join me as we build an epic Metroidvania game in Godot 4 using GD script. This is the Metroidvania Forge. All right, welcome back everybody. So today's video is going to be a big chunky one, but it's also going to be kind of a really important one and one that I think is pretty hot and pretty heavily requested. In fact, in my previous action RPG series, people were requesting a map system of some sort. And I never delivered on that, partly because, I don't know, I think that project wasn't as well planned out as this one, and I just never found where I want to fit it in. So what we're going to build today is not only a map system, but a pause menu with a map and system settings as well. So it's going to be pretty loaded. But this pause menu is going to be the first thing that we'll build. It's going to serve as the backdrop and the container for the map. And we'll build that system menu that's going to have some options that we'll be able to use to get back to the title screen, as well as in future episode control audio volume levels. And then we'll introduce the map system. And the map system is going to be actually a little bit more straightforward from a technical implementation standpoint than you might expect. We're going to essentially record like we've shown in our save script. In fact, let me open that real quick. So here in our SaveManager, we're going to just be populating this discovered areas array, and then we're going to use that data both in our save game and in our pause menu to determine which areas we've discovered and which ones we need to display. So that part's going to be fairly straightforward. The tricky part with a map can be how to display it maybe and how to make it easy to work with. And so I'm going to address some of those questions and concerns as well. And in addition to that, we'll add like a little player indicator so we can see where we are within the room that we're in. And that part is a little bit more, tiny bit more involved, but not too crazy. And when it's all said and done, we'll have a fully functioning map system. Now, this map system is going to be kind of a typical Castlevania style where it shows the rooms that you've discovered that have been revealed. An alternative way to do a map would be to maybe build a complete map, then you cover it up with bits of fog. And then as you discover areas, instead of displaying something new, you're now removing the fog from the map display, right? But the general concepts here could be applied either way. So if that's the kind of map style that you want, maybe you'll be able to get what you need from this video and be able to implement that fog of war discovery style map. But with that said, let's go ahead and let's get started by building our pause menu. Okay, so we may need to bring in some assets, but I'm pretty sure we've probably brought all the assets in that we're going to need at this point. And so we're going to be creating, as part of this pause menu in the map system, we're going to be using some of the new icons that you should have already in this general folder. Otherwise, everything else you should already have in your project. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new scene, and I'm going to create a new folder in the root of my resources to contain the pause menu. So I'm just going to go create new folder. And then we'll create a new scene in here. And we could choose a type. Let's go ahead and do this. I don't normally do this. You can change it later, but canvas layer is the type of node that we want as the root of this scene. Call it pause menu and say, okay, wonderful. And in addition to setting this up, let's go ahead and create a folder for the scripts that we're going to write. And how we're going to build it is the pause menu, the configuration menu, and the map. All those scripts are going to live within this. So it's not going to be a ton, but it'll be nice to keep it organized. And before we get into any scripts, of course, let's just go ahead and set up this pause menu. We've created this canvas layer that's going to allow us to stack this pause menu, and we kind of really want it to be stacked on top of all other objects potentially. But really what we need to do for that is we'll just leave it on layer 1. And how that should work out is, let's see, let's just open a couple things that we've built recently, like our player HUD. So if I open a player HUD and look at this, this is on layer 2, so it will be on top of the pause menu. And so that's important and worth keeping in mind, okay? That's going to kind of help dictate it. So if you needed to adjust the stacking of this pause menu because of different design or goal for your game, then this stacking will be changed with this layer here. I'm also going to come into process mode and set this to always because we want our pause menu to always be working. Now what we're going to do, this pause menu is going to be loaded when we pause the game. And so this is super important because we're going to use the scene tree .paused, so it's going to pause all execution of any script that is set to inherit, unless it's a child of something that's always. So like our player and our levels, and in the future the enemies that we'll build, they will all pause when we hit the pause button, but this menu needs to be able to execute its scripts, so we want it set to always. And since we're talking about scripts, let's go ahead and just right click up here and we'll attach a script. And oops, I actually didn't want it here. Let's see, where did I put it? I want to put it in scripts folder. There we go. And that should work just fine. It should allow you to drag and drop that without any issue. I'm going to go ahead and give this a class name, and then we're going to leave it for a while, okay? This is going to be our pause menu. We're not going to make this a globally loaded script. You could, but I don't want to, partly because of the map and all the systems there. I don't think that's something we want sitting on our memory at all times. So give it a class name, go ahead and save it, and then for now, we can just close this script or just go back to the 2D. Doesn't matter either way. So much like our player HUD, we've got a control that we use to kind of nest all of our elements within. We're going to do the same thing with our pause menu. So we'll add a control node, and I'm going to set the anchor preset to the full rectangle because I'm a nerd like that. This one obviously does need to cover the scene though, right? So it makes sense. So the backdrop on this pause menu is something that I'm going to leave up to you to some degree, but you may as well follow along with this. I'm going to add a color rectangle node just so that we have something, and I'll set this to that full rect scale mode as well, or anchor preset. And I'm going to just make mine like a really dark gray or black or something like that. And this is just simply going to cover up the screen. Now, because I know I've got my player HUD stacked on top of this, I'm going to go ahead and just copy this real quick and paste it in here so we can get a sense of what that looks like. We're going to have this health bar here. So I want to actually account for that in the design of my menu because I think I want to keep the health bar there on top. I mean, that's an intentional design decision I've made. So if you don't like that, you could change it, right? You could put your pause menu on top. But I'm going to go ahead and just duplicate this color rectangle, make it completely black. And then instead of having it full rectangle, I'm going to scale it to this right here, this top wide. And then I'm going to give it a height. And the height that I want, I'm just going to give it a minimum Y of 36 pixels, I think. Yeah, there we go. And so you can see it gives kind of this section on the top that's going to be nested behind our health bar, as well as some pause text that will pop in there. But at this point, I don't want to have this Control 2, all of this HP HUD stuff in here. So I'm going to delete that and remove it. But there we go. That was just kind of to give us an idea, right, of how things are going to be laid out. Okay, so those are our two backdrop items. And for now, let's go ahead and take this color rectangle, and I'm going to give it an alpha. And this is just going to be useful for demonstrating how the pause works later in the game. I'll probably come back and set this to a full opacity because that's going to work better with the map, in my opinion. But again, to each their own, you can do whatever you like there. Now I'm going to go ahead and add just a simple label. And the text for this is just going to say paused in all caps. And if you've been following along, we did set the Allegard font as our default font. So that's nice because everything shows up appropriately there. Now let's see, I want this paused text to kind of align on the right. And technically I could make it a child of this color rectangle here and do center right like that. And then just drag it over a bit, or maybe even better, just hold shift and use the arrow key to nudge it once or twice. Well, or a couple times like that. Okay, so you get your pause text kind of positioned. I'm going to set this to a right horizontal alignment. I'm going to increase the size because what I want to do is I want this pause text to kind of spread and space out a little bit. Now, a couple ways that we could handle this. I guess the easiest way would just be to add spaces in between each letter. Okay. But I think there's a letter spacing option that's worth exploring just for educational purposes. So if I come down to, it's going to be under theme overrides. And then maybe under, is it under styles or font sizes? Let's look at styles. Normal focus. Nope. Fonts. Let's do this. So we're going to make a font variation under fonts. Okay. So it's going to take our font here and we'll make a variation of that font. And we'll go to extra spacing. And I think this is the one we want. Is that the one we want? No, that did nothing. Glyph. Okay, it's the glyph spacing here. So we can just add some extra spacing here. Then anything we type is going to have that extra padding around it, right? Now you could add, I'm not sure what the space is then. I can't remember. Extra width of the space glyphs. Oh, so change the size of the space maybe. Extra spacing at the top. Let's test that out just to be sure. So let's go ahead and add a space in between the U and the S. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change this space and see what happens. Okay, yeah, that changes the size of a space. We'll just reset it and let it use the default. That's fine. I just wanted to understand what that did. So there we go. We've spaced this out. The only other thing I'll do to this paused text is I want to give it kind of a deep red, kind of neutral color so it doesn't stand out too much. So you could use colors or you could modulate it. We'll go ahead and use color here. So I'm just going to keep it on red, maybe slightly orange, drag it down to be dark, and then drag it towards the more neutral tone over here. Something kind of like that. And voila. Now we've got a nice label for our pause screen so that the user has no question if the game is paused or not. Okay. The remainder of the items that we're going to plop in here, we're going to separate into two different containers because we're going to have our map or our main pause menu, and then we're going to also have the system menu. Okay. So let's go ahead and add a control for each of those. And I'm going to start with the first one first. Set it to this full rect. And then I'm going to drag the top down to right here so that it lines up with the bottom of our little top panel. Okay, so this control is going to house all of our regular map and other pause menu items. We could call it map. We could call it something else. Now I'm going to add in here, and we're not going to do anything with it other than add it, but I'm going to add a spot where maybe we can list the abilities that we will unlock in the next chapter. And in addition to that, we'll obviously have a map. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add two labels. So 1, 2, first label we'll call abilities. Second label we'll put map in there. Okay. And then first label, bump it down, and then the map, I'm going to bump it down as well, but then I'm just going to drag it over. And in fact, I kind of want the map label, actually, I'm not sure if I want it centered or left aligned. I'm going to leave it left aligned for right now. So we'll just have a section on the left-hand side for abilities, and then the remainder of this box will be reserved for the map. We're obviously going to need to display the map items in here. I'm going to actually rename this node from map. I'm just going to call it pause screen. Okay, and I'm going to add another control, and we'll call this control map. Okay, and this map node, I'm going to just drag it over here and make it pretty big. This is essentially going to represent where we can draw the map. So if you wanted to put a different color backdrop on this, you could, something like that. I may even make it larger so it's behind the text there and do that. And then the only other thing that we're going to put on this pause screen right now is just a simple button. And this button is going to be used to access the system. So I'm going to call it system menu button, like that. I'm going to go ahead and access this by unique name so it's easy to use in my code. And there we go. There's our pause screen. Oh, we need to position this button though, don't we? And give it some text. So this should just say something like system. And I'm going to put this button in the bottom right. You can put it wherever you prefer. Let's see. Yeah, it was in the right place. Bottom right. And then I'm going to hold shift and just bump it up a little bit like that. And then I don't really, one thing I'm not a big fan of, and I do a lot of web and UI stuff, I hate small spacing on the left and right of text on buttons. So I'm going to just drag this wider, give that button a bigger, chunkier look, because I think that looks better. There we go. Okay, so we've got our pause menu. We can now duplicate the pause menu. We'll hide the pause menu, and then we're going to rename this pause screen. I'm just calling it menu, pause screen, same difference. This one is going to be our system screen or menu. So we can just call it system. Okay, now our system is going to be fairly straightforward. I'm going to start actually just by deleting all of these real quick. We're going to kind of start from scratch with this one. And then what we're going to add in here is we're going to add some vbox containers and things like that to help sort everything. So let's add a vbox container. If you recall using this, this will allow us to kind of stack things in a vertical stack. I'm going to resize it and center it on the top. Okay. Now this vbox container is going to have all the buttons that we're going to need. So the things that we want to build into this basic functionality right now, we're going to have a button to go back to the map. We'll have a button to go back to the title screen. Okay, so that it's easy to get there. And then we're going to add some UI elements that we use in the future for the audio levels. So it's going to be a pretty straightforward system menu, but it'll illustrate the concepts and how you can build your own. And in fact, I will say, I'm going to preface this. I think ideally we build this system menu as its own scene so that we could reuse it, because it would be nice to have the system menu on the title screen, but I'm just not going to do that right now because, again, the concepts are pretty straightforward, and I think right now it's just worth learning how to build these things instead of trying to put it everywhere, because, you know, some people are going to want it on their main menu and some aren't. I even like building games with limited or no main menu if at all possible, and that's always something fun. And so then this pause and the system are always accessible from the get-go. Okay, so the system menu, vbox container here. I'm going to actually make this a little bit wider because we're going to have some stuff in it. The first thing I'm going to add is actually an hbox container. Fooled you, didn't I? And we're going to add 2 buttons to this. So let's just add a button, duplicate it. Okay, first button, we're going to call this one back to map. And then the second button is going to say back to title. And then because I want these to fill this nicely, you can see the hbox container is resizing to the width of the vbox container, but the buttons aren't doing the same thing. I'm going to select both buttons, and I'm going to come down here to, is it under layout? Container sizing. And then there's this horizontal and vertical settings. I'm going to just turn on expand, and you can see how they're both now taking up equal amount of space. Okay. So those are our 2 buttons there. We can give these a unique name as well. So back to map button and back to title button. That's what we're going to call them. If you like shorter names, by all means. I like sticking with longer verbose names sometimes. I think I err on the side of too verbose, but I like it to be less confusing. The more I code, the more weird and goofy I get about that kind of stuff. Now underneath this, I'm going to add a label. And this label is going to just be used to show our audio levels. And then we'll add, we're going to add some more hbox containers actually. So you can see how we're using these nested vbox and hbox containers to get these more complex layouts. There's other ways you could do this with grids and things, but I think this is a really easy and straightforward way to handle it. We're going to have 3 audio buses, and we'll talk about that in a subsequent episode in this chapter. But there's going to be a music channel, sound effects channel, and a UI channel. That way we have, essentially 3 different types of sound, and they can each have their own volume level. So we'll create a container for each of those. And I'm going to just start with this first one by adding yet another label. And this first one will make the music, I think. And then we're going to add, what we're going to use here is a slider. So if we look at our controls and search for slider, we want the horizontal slider. So I'll go ahead and create that. Okay, now we need to get these to size properly. Because we're going to reuse this after I set these up, I want to make sure that our labels have good sizing to them. So I can't actually resize it right now, you'll notice, because it's the child of an hbox container. It's kind of inheriting its size in that way. But we can come in here and make modifications that will affect it. So what we can do on our label is we can come down to the layout and give it a minimum, custom minimum size. I'm going to say 60 pixels because music is the longest, the most amount of text we're going to have in one of these labels. So we're just going to give it a little bit of padding. The other ones will be just fine. And now our H slider, we're going to select that. And we want to do that same thing we did with these buttons. We want it to expand horizontally. So we'll just go to our control layout, container sizing, turn on expand. You'll notice this one looks a little bit different, but it's still got that expand option. Okay, so there we go. Now, just so you can see what these are going to look like, I'm going to give this H slider a value. These work just like our progress bar that we use for our health. These have, minimum, maximum values, and we can configure these later, but I'm actually going to set it from 0 to 1, and I'm going to set the step at 0.05, and then I'm going to set the value at 0.5. And we'll do more with these again later when we get to that sound and audio bus episode. But for now, at least we've got some basic settings in here, and you can see with it at 50% what that slider will look like in your game. Okay, so with that done, let's give this slider a name, and we'll call this one the music slider. I'm going to turn on access by unique name here. We're not going to really need to hook this one up today, but it's still worth doing. Did I put unique name access on these? I don't think, it doesn't look like I did. Okay, make sure those buttons, you don't have to do that, just makes it easy. Okay, I'm going to duplicate this twice. And of course, we got that little error because we've got repeated names. You can't do that with the access by unique name, right? So this second one will make the sound effects channel or bus. And so we can change the name of this slider to SFX slider. And then we'll change this label to UI, and we'll change the slider name to UI slider. Okay. Now with that done, I'm just going to turn on the access by unique name for each of those. A couple things that we'll do to this screen, and then we'll be done laying out all of our controls. I want the spacing to be more pleasing. Everything feels crammed together, and of course it's bumped up against the top. Let's first address the spacing between each of these. So I'm going to come to my vbox container, come down to theme overrides under constants, and there's this separation. And we're just going to set this to a higher value. That's all we're going to do. I don't know what the best will be. I think that feels pretty good. I was going to go as high as 20. Let's see what that looks like. I do like that more. And then I'm just going to, with my move tool here, I'm just going to drag the top of this down a bit, and we're good to go. One thing I love about Godot is you don't need to put a ton of effort in to getting a decent UI. Obviously, you could take this UI and we could build a custom theme so that all of our buttons have a unique theme that doesn't match this default Godot theme that they have. And I will be doing a video on that at some point in the future. It's going to be separate from the series, but aside from that, this is going to not only look good, but it's going to function perfectly well. And we're going to have to do minimal amount of code to hook it all up. So I think we've got everything that we need for our different screens here. Pretty straightforward, right? That's probably as easy as it gets, setting up a visual layout for a pause menu and system menu. And I think I'm happy with it. Let me just check my notes. And yeah, we should be good to go. So now what we'll do is we'll move on to the next step, and we're going to have to start hooking up a little bit of the code in our pause menu. As we begin working on the script for our pause menu here, let's talk about how this is going to function. And there are numerous ways you could build and implement a pause menu. And I don't think any of them is necessarily better or worse than the other. It kind of depends on your needs. But what we're going to do is this pause menu, we're going to load it on demand. So when we pause the game, we will load the pause menu and we'll plop it into the scene, into the game world, right? And we'll pause the game behind it. And then this pause menu will be active until we unpause the game. And so we're going to use kind of like maybe escape to pause and unpause on the keyboard, and we'll use like the options or start button on our controllers. So that means that this pause menu is not going to be able to display itself, but it'll handle all of the logic once it's displayed. And then once it clears or goes back to the title menu, it'll just do a few things, and the pause menu can free itself from the game at that point. Now, the pause menu obviously needs to have knowledge of all of the nodes within it. And really the only thing outside of the pause menu that I think we're going to store a reference to was going to be our player. And we'll use him today specifically to remove him if we go back to the title screen. And that's really just about it. And in fact, that's a tightly coupled way of doing it. And so if we were to use a different methodology that we've been using, we could also use the signal bus and have the player free himself, which I'm leaning towards, but I don't know if I'm going to implement that right now. But anyways, this is what we're going to have a reference to. So let's go ahead and grab a reference to maybe all of the items within our menu that we're going to have to access. One thing that I didn't make accessible by unique name were these two controls, and we should do that. That way you can reorganize them as needed. And I'm going to start by dragging those in here. So we've got our system, our pause screen control. Okay, these are our two primary bits of interface. And then within the pause screen, let's go ahead and grab what we need in here. We're going to need this system menu button. And within the system, we're going to need a reference to these buttons here, the back to map and back to title, as well as our 3 sliders, 1, 2, 3, and voila. And if you are unsure, I'm holding Control or Command if you're on a Mac, and then clicking to get multiple selected. If you use Shift, it's going to select, from the beginning of your click to the end and get multiple, but Control allows you to target a couple things. Okay, so there we go. We've got a reference to these different variables, or not variables, these different controls that we're going to have to manipulate. Now, we don't really need any other local variables other than this player. And as I mentioned, we don't even need that if we want to code it slightly differently. But I'm going to go ahead and just kind of gather all this up here, and I'm going to stick them in a code region just to clean it up a little bit. Voila. Okay, there we go. Now, because we're going to load this pause menu on the fly, we're going to definitely leverage the ready function, so we can set that up. We're going to also be utilizing some input detection in this pause menu, so we'll go ahead and use the unhandled input as well. Okay. And then in addition to that, we're going to be creating a number of our own functions and methods that we can use throughout the code. So let's talk about it. Our ready function needs to maybe grab our player, and we may emit this. We'll see how it goes by the end of this episode, if I keep this or not. We need to show our map, which right now is shown by default, this screen, okay? But we are going to be working on the system and forget to turn it off. And so it's nice to account for that in our code, make sure we show the appropriate starting screen that we want. Then we'll eventually have things like some audio set up, but we're not going to do that in today's video because we don't yet have that audio system that we would work with. And in addition to that, we're going to need some setup of the system menu. So these two comments right here are things that we're going to come back to. All right, so that's what our ready function is going to do. And let's talk about showing the map, because that's the one that's going to require maybe its own function. So I'm going to create a function called show cap. Show your cap, sir. Show map. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this function down here. All right, so what are we going to do with show map? It's actually super straightforward. All we're going to do is we're going to show this pause screen. And this is a bad name, isn't it? Show pause screen. You chose a bad name, PT. Let me know if you know what that's a reference to. Mixed reference. Okay, show pause screen. I renamed that. Sorry about that. So we're going to show the pause screen. So here we'll just take our pause screen node, make it visible. And then in addition to that, we're going to make our system not visible. Okay. And then the only other thing that we probably need to do is set up connection to our buttons. And because this can be called multiple times, we're not actually going to connect to those button signals here in our show. And so we need to set up our pause menu. But for our pause menu, we only have one button that we're actually going to be listening to presses on. So I'm just going to do that one inline in the ready function. So that button is the show system menu, I think. What did we call that button? System menu button. Okay, so we're going to take our system menu button, .pressed, .connect, and we'll connect it to a method. And the method or function we want to connect it to, we haven't built yet. We don't really need to do an on system menu button pressed, because what it's going to do is just going to show the system menu, right? So we'll just make that function. I'm going to put this down here. And then we're getting pretty close. You're probably wondering how this is even going to show. So we'll do that next. But show system menu, it's obviously going to do the opposite of this here. And there we go. So if I were to come into this scene and just run it directly, the only thing that works should be this system button. And there we go. Okay, none of these other buttons work. But like I mentioned, you're probably wondering, how do we go from game hidden behind a bush to pause menu? Okay, so let's do that next. Okay, again, there's a lot of ways that we could implement this. I'm going to start with our player, because the only time we really can pause the game is when the player is in the game, right? So I'm going to go into the player script, And hey, look at that. It opened me up to my unhandled input. This is exactly where I'm going to be working on this. I guess the last time I recorded a video, this is kind of where we left off. So that makes sense. But what we're going to do is we've added kind of some extra stuff that we can get rid of here, right? This is to test our HP. I'm going to go ahead and before this, after this action pressed check, I'm going to add an elif statement. So we're going to say if event is action pressed, and we should have, do we have a pause? We don't. We don't have a pause action set up. So let's go ahead and create that here in just a second. Okay, so let's go to our project settings, over to input map, and we need to set that up. I've got show built-in actions turned on. And actually this is worth doing too. Since we're in here, we're going to do two things. So let's make sure we've got a pause action. Okay, we don't. So I'm going to make a new one called pause. Add that. And for pause, I'm going to use escape on the keyboard. And then I'm going to add start, Xbox menu, Nintendo Plus. Okay, I'm going to use those two buttons for the pause. Now, I want to look at these UI actions. Right now, we've been building things like our title screen. Technically, it won't work with our controller. And I don't think I noticed this. It works for the joypad to move, but there's no, you'll notice there's no accept or cancel. Oh, there is a cancel. And maybe it's just the accept I didn't bind. Make sure you've got these all bound. Okay, so I'm going to use the X or the cross button on PlayStation as that. Right here, it tells you what actions are going to be, or what buttons are going to be bound to this accept action. Make sure that you've got those set up. It looks like we did come in here at some point. Maybe we did this in a video, maybe we didn't. But I'm thinking we didn't, okay? Because otherwise I would have set them all up. So make sure you've got those in there. Make sure you've got an accept for your control pad that you might be testing with. Make sure that your select, these I think are bound by default. And then a cancel. Make sure you've got those in there, okay? Okay, so now this line of code works because we have a pause action defined. And really, it's going to be pretty straightforward. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to say get tree. I didn't mean to make a new line, but okay. Get tree, and then we'll say dot paused equals true. So this is a built-in property on our scene root and on our scene tree, and it pauses the game. And like I was talking about earlier, any node that has their script processing set to inherit or the processing set to inherit is going to pause. And then in addition to that, we want to display our pause menu. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to say pause menu as a new variable. It's going to be a new pause menu. And we're going to set it equal to, and we're going to just load it right here. We're going to say load, and we need to get the path, or just drag in this pause menu scene. And then we'll say dot instantiate. And then we need to just add it to the tree. I guess we could add it as a child of the player. It doesn't really matter too much where we add it because of the nature of how it's built. So I'm just going to say add child pause menu. Now you might want to say get parent or get tree.root and then add the child, but as long as you add it, we should be good. One other thing we want to do is once this happens, we don't really want to try and run any of the rest of our code. It should stop anyways because it's paused, but I'm just going to put a return so that this function ends prematurely when we pause the game. And then because it's paused, next time there's an unhandled input, this player is not going to process the input because its process mode will be set to inherit. It should be paused, right? So if this is working, we should be able to run the game. And hey, there we go. I hit escape and we've got a pause menu. Couple issues. I can't select anything with the keyboard. I can't get out of it by hitting escape again. I can use the mouse to click system. Okay. We haven't hooked any of these up, but they're there. But I mean, that's good progress. Now we pause the game, and you can see I left the game transparent so you could see that the scene behind it was paused. Okay, so let's kind of take this pausing action full circle, and we'll implement similar code in our pause menu here. So now that the pause menu has focus and is kind of working, we can come to the unhandled input in our pause menu, and then we can just check the if event dot is action pressed, and we want pause again, right? So at any point, if you're on the pause menu and you press the pause button again, then we want to resume the game and close the pause menu. So we'll say get tree dot paused, appust equals false. And then we're going to queue free this. And actually there's a bug in here. So I'm going to leave this bug in here. And I think we should be able to demonstrate it right away. But what this will do, right, is unpause the game and get rid of the pause menu. That should work. So I'm just going to hit escape. You can see all my physics and everything stopped. Now, if I hit escape again, what happens? It's not seeming to work, is it? But I want to just point something out. Let's go ahead and keep the game running. What's happening is we're probably going to get this pause pressed happening on our player kind of immediately. In fact, let's just double check this and make sure it's working before I do this. But let's go ahead and print pause pressed, just so we can see. I'm going to save that, go back. Okay. So if I hit escape, yeah, you can see it's detecting that pause being pressed. So why does this not seem to be working? If I go to my player, I'm going to show you what's happening first. How about that? I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to put another print statement here. Player pause detected. Okay. So it's a different message, but watch what happens when I go back to the game. If I hit escape, you can see each time I do, while I'm on the pause menu, it says pause pressed and player pause detected. So we're pausing the game, or we're unpausing the game, and then we're pausing it again instantly, right? So we can avoid that with a pretty simple fix, and that's just doing this. There's this get viewport, set input as handled. Okay. And what that will do is it'll say, okay, nobody else can get this. And that's why this really only affects other uses of unhandled input, right? Because if you do some other input detection, it might still detect it. So this only works for this kind of use case, but we are using unhandled input on both our player and our pause menu. And this says, okay, well, if it was this action, and let's go ahead and say it was handled, that means no other script will handle it. And if I save and go back, there we go. Now I can pause and unpause the game just fine. And it's cool because I can pause midair and it works. Thanks, Godot, for being an awesome game engine. That makes it super simple, right? We obviously still need to address like auto-focusing the system so that we can use that, or being able to access it, right? There's some things that we need to do. But in general, we've got a pause menu that works. Okay, I want to do one last thing here with this menu. Whoop, wrong one. Okay. I want to hook up the back to map and the back to title buttons. We're going to leave, like I've mentioned multiple times, the audio stuff for later. So we'll just come in here and we'll create a function for this. So I'm going to say set up system menu. We only need to do this when we start the screen, but we just need to make sure it happens before we try and access a button. Okay, so one thing we'll do later is, of course, set up the sliders. But for now, we can set up the buttons that we have. So we've got the back to map button. So when this is pressed, we'll connect to a function, and we'll go ahead and call this on back to title pressed. And of course, we can create that function. And then the other button that we have is the, let's see, I just totally mixed that up, didn't I? That's back to map, and I did back to title. So let's change this, back to title button. There we go. Now we'll do the back to map. Back to map button pressed dot connect. And then this one we can just use that show map or show pause menu is I think what we have it. Yeah, show pause screen. There we go. Okay, so we've got show system menu, setup system menu, show pause screen. Okay. So let's do this on back to title pressed. Or actually, let's test real quick. Let's just test that back. So we've got the system button, and then we have back to map. Okay, so those work. And from the system, we can unpause just by hitting the pause button again. Okay, but then the next bit will be to hook up the back to title. So this will allow your players to do that full circle back to the title screen if they need to. And here's what we're going to do. We need to get rid of the player or free the player. That's why I thought we might get a reference to him before. And then other than that, we can just call our SceneManager and do a scene transition. Or is it transition scene? Yeah, transition scene. And the scene that we want to go to is our title screen. So we can, if we can find that, yoink, we just drop that in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and just use default dummy values for these other options, which are the target area, the offset, vector 2.0, and a transition direction. I tend to just use up on all of these, okay? It's giving me an error. Did I type something wrong or out of order maybe? Oh, I didn't put a 2 on my vector 2. Okay, there we go. Okay, so make sure that you've got that set up. We'll talk about this free player in just a second here, but let's go ahead and make sure that this works. So if I go to pause and hit back to title, boom, loaded the title screen, okay? Now I'm gonna say actually we missed one thing. We probably need to queue free this pause menu, right? Because I don't think we did. So I think it's just sitting there like we've done here. And we probably need to unpause the game. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy those both. Paused, false, queue free, right? And then maybe we do this. Shoot, we just could have almost made that whole, these 3 lines of code a function and just reuse that function, but whatever. Oh yeah, this is not happen on, never mind. We don't need the unhandled input pressed because this is not an input like that. Okay, let's test one more time and just see it. It worked before, but I think it was going to be potentially buggy. Back to title. Okay. So now we're at a point where when we run the game and we go to the pause menu, we need our keyboard and our controller to be able to access and hit these buttons. So let's go ahead and just address that. Now, one thing that we've done in the past is we could just grab the focus of a button, but I'm going to go ahead and run this and demonstrate that. When I pause, I don't really want the focus to go to the system button, right? Because I feel like that's not the primary reason the player pauses. So that could be kind of annoying. So what I'm going to do instead is we're going to add to our unhandled input a condition where if they press some button, then we highlight it. And so maybe what we want it to do is check if they push maybe left or right direction. That makes sense to me because that's where the button is. It's in one of those 2 directions or in both of those directions. I also only want to run the following code when the map or the regular pause screen is visible. So we're going to say if pause screen dot visible equals true, 2 equals, right? Okay, then we'll do this check. We'll say if event.isActionPressed, and then I'm going to say right, and then we can copy that, and then we can say or if it's down. Okay, so if either of those buttons are pressed, then what we'll do is we'll grab the focus of that system menu button. Okay. This is going to get us partway there. There's going to be a little bit more work to do. So now if I hit up or left or enter, nothing happens. But if I hit right or down, then it highlights the system menu and I can press enter. But we still need to focus when we get to this screen. Okay, so let's come back. And then what we can do for that one is really we can handle this on the show system menu because once they go to the system menu, they are expected to interact with something. And so what we can do is we'll just grab the first button, which is, if we look, it's our back to map button. So I'm going to say back to map button dot grab focus inside of our show system menu function. So we'll just test this one more time. Okay, so now I can go to the system and now I have focus of these and I can go back to the map and I have to hit right or down again to get back to the system. But to me, that's okay. Maybe it could be a little bit kludgy, but you know, it's hard to know exactly how you guys want your menus to be. And I think that this is a good potential solution for a lot of you. So I think we're good with all the basic setup of the buttons of the scene, because again, those sliders we'll do later. Everything else seems to be working good. Obviously, we're missing the biggest critical piece of this video, which is that map. Okay, let's look at this pause screen here. I'm going to go ahead and take this rectangle in the back and turn my alpha up so that it's dark, because that's going to look better for the map in my opinion. And I want to show you the map kind of mock-up I have that we're going to more or less mirror. Okay, so looking at this map here, there's going to be one critical difference, but essentially this is what I want. I want different colored rectangles that represent each screen or room. And I want to show the connecting sections. Now I'm going to opt for more like a Castlevania style, where I think what they've got is probably something more like, you know, just showing some sort of hole between the areas, something like that. this is what I'm going to opt for instead of the yellow. The yellow was convenient for setting this up, but this is what I prefer. In addition to this, I want our map to be easy to understand from an editor standpoint and easy to work with. So we're going to build some functionality and tools to help detect the size of the room and detect where these doors are, because if we had to manually place all these doors, it could be kind of a pain. Now, with that said, I could just take this screenshot of this map and reveal it by having some rectangles over top of it. You know, we could just, like within Godot, we could just have rectangles that match the background. And then if we visited the room, then we simply just hide that rectangle that was covering that section of the map. That's totally legit. And that's kind of how the fog of war style of a map would work, right? We would just remove items that reveal the room behind it. And I think that's okay if you want to do that. The functionality, the technical logic, and how you store the data for that, it would be the same as what I'm going to demonstrate in this video. The difference, though, is what I'm going to build is I'm going to build a system that shows these rooms based on if they've been visited. And if not, then it simply won't draw that rectangle. And yeah, it should be pretty cool. So because of the time-saving features that we're going to build into it, I hope you guys are going to want to stick around and see how I finish implementing this. Let's go into our pause screen into this map control node here. And we're going to add a new control node that we're going to use to begin building this. So I'm going to go Control A, just make it a control node. Okay, so this is going to become one of these map nodes. And what we're going to essentially do is just place these, they're going to be little scenes that will just plop around the map, and we'll just create the map here in the editor, and then how it looks is how it will display once discovered. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do to start building this, I'm going to reset the layout of this, or actually let's kind of set the layout to maybe the default minimum size that I want. And I'm going to go ahead and reset this positioning of this node real quick. Okay, the control node. What I want is I want this layout to kind of be true to the proportions of the levels. And by default, we've got a default size set up. So if we look at like a level bounds, let's go ahead and look at one of those maybe as an example. Is that under general? Level transition, script, level bounds. Okay, so we have a minimum size on the level bound, right? That's the smallest room we can have, 480 by 270, because that's the size of our screen and we don't want our levels to be smaller than that. At least that's how I set it up. Now, what we're going to do with the rooms is they're going to have those same kind of minimum dimensions, except we're not going to display it 480 pixels by 270 pixels tall or sized, right, for the room. Instead, we're going to use a much smaller version of that, but that fits those kind of same proportions. So there's going to be math involved in this. Oh, I hate math, right? But this math will be fairly straightforward, so don't worry too much. So I'm going to have a scale factor of about 40 times, 40 times smaller, okay? So what we can do then is we look at this control that we're starting to set up. I'm going to come to the layout, and I'm going to give it a custom minimum size. And was it 480? If we go 480 divided by 40, what do we get? 12. So it's 12 pixels wide is the minimum, or the minimum width. And then we'll do the same thing for the height. We'll go 270 divided by 40, which gives us 6. And I'm actually, I guess 6 is fine. That's fine. I was going to go 7. For some reason, I was thinking it was 7. But anyways, there we go. We've got a custom minimum size set. So now if we look at this, oops, I didn't mean to zoom out. If we look at this and try and resize it there, that is the smallest a room will be on our map, okay? Which I think is appropriate. Now you could adjust this. It doesn't have to be this scale, but that 40 times smaller is important for our code. Whatever you pick, it just has to be consistent across rooms, right? So that the sizes and the scales match up, okay? Now, before this gets too goofy, I'm gonna go ahead and give this control a name, and we'll just call it a map node. And I'm going to save it as a scene, save branch as scene. And then we can just save it here in our pause menu. That's fine, because this is the only place we're going to use it. And let's open this guy up. Okay. So now let's see, we've got this little rectangle here. We're going to be drawing just some simple color rectangle controls to draw the edges of these. So let's go ahead and just add one of those to start. So we've got a color rectangle, and I'm going to make it white by default. These color rectangles only need to be 1 pixel wide for my project settings. It may need to be different for yours, but I'm going to go ahead and give these custom minimum width of 1 and height of 1. Okay, so they can't be smaller than that. And I'm going to change this anchoring depending on the side. So let's start with the top. I'm just going to pick this top wide. And because we have minimum width of, or minimum width and minimum height set, right? The minimum height of 1 is being reflected here. So it's 1 pixel tall. So then I could duplicate this. We can make this second one be the bottom rectangle. So essentially it's the same thing, except we'll set this to bottom wide, which you'll notice I just used the anchor preset here, which is the same thing that's displayed up here. Okay. And then we'll duplicate one more time. This third rectangle, we're going to go over here and we'll set it to this left wide option. And one more needs to be on the right. Okay. Boink. Okay. So there's our rectangle. There are other ways we could draw this. I think this is just a convenient way. It's a little bit simple to picture and wrap your head around. In addition to this, I'm going to add a couple things. I want to add a label. Now this label is going to be specific to the editor. We're only going to display this in the editor, but it's going to help us as we're laying out our map. And so let's just put an example in here. It'll be level name. And that's huge. That's really humongous. We don't want it to be that big. We'll just come in here to our layout, transform, and I'm going to set the scale to 0.1. It's going to be teensy tiny, itty bitty little label. Why am I no move? Okay, I'm just going to bump it down here. All right. And then in addition to that, I'm going to go ahead and modulate it. I don't want it to be super bright either. So let's see, theme. I'll do it down here with visibility. Okay, modulate, set the alpha to somewhere in the middle. Okay, so we've got a level name. And then we're going to add one more control. And this control is going to be used to house the little transition blocks. Okay, they're just going to be little black color rectangles. So just like these, except they're going to be the size and kind of match the transition areas, or at least the location. Okay, so I'm going to give this a name of transition blocks. And we can make this accessible by unique name, although I doubt we'll move it. Okay, and there we go. This is the setup for one of these map nodes. Now, before we get into the code, we'll just show you what this looks like. Okay, you can drag these in here and we'll be able to resize them, except we're also going to make it so that we have a tool to help us resize them automatically. But we'll lay them out, and then when we need them to be a different color, we'll simply come into these and just modulate them based on the area that they belong to. And so one thing that would be worth doing at this point is saving some swatches. So I'm going to just start with a couple swatches. So I'm going to have like maybe my forest areas, right? Which I'm going to lay this out roughly right now because this is incorrect maybe, but we're going to have those two. I've got scene 1 and scene 2. And then I've got like a third scene. Make sure it's not a child of another one. Okay. Where did that go? There it is. Okay. We've got like a little dungeon area down here below one of these. Okay. And then we do have actually a save room right here. So my map is really limited right now. I hope your guys' is a little bit more advanced. So I'm going to have to add more to this. But the save room is like the smallest size possible. So it's something like that. Okay. But let's assume that's my map. Then what I've got is I've got like my forest areas. I'm going to modulate those with a greenish color. So I'll come here and set one. And I just want it to be, let's pick it a yellowy green. Don't go with huge, super high saturation. Pick something kind of in the middle. It'll be a little bit more pleasing to the eye. And then once you've got that, you can come here to swatches and just say, boink, add. There we go. So now I've got some swatches for that. My save room is going to be pink to match that little save item. So I'm going to come in here, modulate this to my desired pink color. Sounds good to me. Add that to my swatches. And then my dungeon, we'll make this one, I'll make it blue, like a bluish gray color. Okay. So there we go. 3 different colors for 3 different types of areas. And you may have more. But now you can see we can just modulate them to match. And if we decided like, oh, this is actually part of the dungeon, then we could just come in here, find our swatch for the dungeon and change it. Okay. So these swatches can be very handy for reusing colors. So that's a good setup for this map node. The next step is going to be the script, which is going to get pretty involved. All right, back to our map node. And actually, I noticed I didn't finish configuring this transition blocks properly. It needs to be this full rectangle anchors. Okay, there we go. Now we're ready to put a script on it. So I'm going to come up here to my map node and attach a script, and it's going to save it in the pause menu. Let's go ahead and adjust that so it saves in the scripts folder here. There we go. And we'll create it. And we're going to give this a class name. It's a map node, and it does extend control, so that's fine. Two other things we can do to set this up. I want it to be a tool script because we're going to have it do stuff in the editor, and I want to give it an icon. Okay, we've got a little icon for this, so if you grabbed the download from the itch.io page for this chapter, then underneath icons, there should be a map node icon. And I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to reload the project so that it updates the node in my scene tree, and then we'll be ready to rock and roll. Let's see, project, reload current project. Okay, there we go. Map node's got a custom node. When we look at our pause menu, I'm going to close the player HUD here. You can see our map nodes display unique icon here in the scene tree. And let's start working on this script. So the first thing that I want to store is a constant variable. So we can't change it. And this is going to be, I mean, we can change it in code, right? But this is going to be our scale factor. Remember, we already talked about this, and I have a scale factor of 40 times. So I'm just going to set it equal to 40. Okay, that way we can use this anytime we need to do math. We don't have the type 40, we can just change it. And then if you have a different scale factor, we'll be using this in place of 40. So you can set it to whatever you need to be. So if it's 30 times or 20 or whatever it needs to be, it'll work. Now, in order for this map node to be smart, there's a couple things we need, right? If we want it to be able to display the level name and get the size of the level, then we need to have a reference to that scene. So that's going to be one variable. Now, in addition to that, we're going to want a button to be able to update this manually so that if we decide that the level's changed or something, we can come in and update it. We also are going to want to have some variables for keeping track of where those entrances are that we need to draw on the map, okay? And so we'll kind of gather some data for that. Those are what we call the transition blocks. And then we're going to pop those into this transition blocks scene, right? So the only things we need to maybe manipulate node-wise are going to be these. We're going to be adding color rectangles to our transition blocks, and we're going to be updating the label in the editor and hiding it when we're in the game, okay? And then those other variables, maybe what we'll do is we'll add them as we build the script out so that they make a little bit more sense. So I'm going to get started with the ready function here. Now this function, we're going to do different code if we're in the editor than if we're not. So we'll first check if engine is editor hint. Then we could do something here if we need to, but really what we need to do in the ready function is if it's not in the editor. So in our else part of this statement, okay? Keep this here in case you decide you need to do something in editor. We don't need to right now. But what I'm going to do, if it isn't the editor, if it's in the game, then I'm going to take our label and I'm going to queue free it because I don't want it to display. We're going to need to create and display the transition blocks, okay, that show on the sides. We will also do this in editor, but we're not going to do it on ready in the editor, okay? I'll show you what we're going to do there. We're going to do something a little bit different. And then after that, we need to check if this section has been discovered by player. And obviously, if we have discovered it, then we can show it. If not, we can hide it, okay? So that's a basic commented out system of what we're going to be building here, and we'll come back and revisit that. Now, the next thing I want to do, I'm going to come back up here to our variables, and let's get our first variable or two in there. I'm going to export a file variable, okay? And we're going to limit this file to files of type scene. So we're going to go *.tscn. Okay, so it has to be, that's a wildcard. It has to end with that extension. And we're just going to call this our linked scene. And technically this is a string, I guess. We're going to use a setter function. So we're going to say set equals, we're going to say on scene set. Sometimes we've done that setter just kind of in line with the variable, but this one I'm going to do separate. Okay, so let's go ahead and create this function. What happens when we set the scene? Now, this is obviously going to take in a value, and it's going to be of type string, right? Because that's what we're allowing it to be. When we set the value in here, we're going to do a check. So it's possible that the value hasn't changed, in which case we're not going to do anything. So we'll do that first. We'll say if, let's see, linked scene does not equal value, then we know that we need to do some changes. And then we'll set the linked scene equal to the value. And then what we'll do here is we're going to check if we're in the editor. So if engine.isEditor hint, then we're going to update the node, is what this is called. Okay. And this is a function that we'll have to create. We're going to call this in a couple different places. So let's go ahead and just get this started right now. Create our update node function. And this is giving me an error because I spelled value with an S up here. Values. Value. There we go. Clean that up. Okay. Now we're not quite ready for this update node script. Some of these scripts are going to be somewhat involved. And so what the update node is going to do is it's going to resize this. It's going to set the level name. And then it's also going to store the data that we need to create the little entrances or the, the area transition blocks that we're going to display. So if I come back here, we can kind of start that. But I think before we do, we really need to finish defining some of our variables here. We're going to use a special export variable that's new. I don't remember which version of Godot was added, but it's going to be called export tool button. And we give it some text here. So this is the label, call it update. And technically, I guess we can give it an icon and maybe we'll change that. But for right now, I'm just going to leave that alone. And then what this is we define it as a variable. So we'll call this update node action. And then we set it equal to a callable that we want to call. So we can use that same update node function that we just created. Okay. So essentially, anytime we change the scene file, then update node will get called automatically if the scene is different, right? If it's changed. But if for some reason, maybe the scene file hasn't changed, but the scene itself has been changed, and we want to manually recall that update node, then that's what we're going to use this button for. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and let's go look at our pause menu. So we can see here, if I select one of these map nodes, there's this update button, okay? And when I click it, if we look at the script, let's go ahead and just do an update node print, okay? Now when I come back in here and click this, we should see it in the output. You see that there? Boop, 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 boop. And likewise, if we were to change the reference to one of these scenes, let's go in here and let's just say levels, forest, and pick scene 1, right? Then you can see it also called update node. I mean, maybe that's hard to see, but it did. Okay. So we've got this code kind of starting to do something. It doesn't do much yet, but it's doing something, right? Okay. Now let's go back up to our variables, because now that this is working, let's create some variables that are going to allow us to store some of this data. And I'm also going to make them export variables so that they can be manually adjusted if you feel the need to. Okay. So we're going to export. First, we're going to export several arrays. And so this first export variable is going to be called entrances top. And this is going to be an array of, we're just going to make floats. It's going to be pretty straightforward. And we'll just initialize it as an empty array. And what we're going to store here is essentially like the offset of all of the entrances on the top of the map. And I'm doing 4 separate variables and just a float because it'll simplify some of the other code, I think. So we'll do top, right, bottom, and left. Okay. There are other ways we could store these as, a single variable maybe, but I'm going to keep it as is here. Then in addition to this, we need to export. I don't think we need to export this one actually, but let's go ahead and export an indicator. Screw it. I'm not going to export this one. I'm going to just make it a variable. Indicator underscore offset. Now, indicator is going to be referring to our player, where he is, okay? And we're going to just set this initially as a vector 2.0. And then I think we're good. Okay, so we want to be able to store these entrance values. And if we look at these, now we've got these entrance values, and it's going to be an array. So we could kind of give it some manually, and it's going to give us some offset values that we can add. All right. We're going to actually populate these though in our code. Again, I'm just going to display them maybe more for debugging purposes than anything right now, but it'll help bring some peace of mind to what's happening here. Okay, so when we come in here to our update node, that's going to be one thing we update. We're also going to have to kind of set a size for this. Like we don't have, obviously the node itself has a native size, right? And a minimum size, but we need to calculate the size of it. And we don't need to store that as a variable anywhere because the node itself has a size, so we can just set it directly there. Okay. And then we can also set this indicator offset, which this isn't going to be dependent so much on the level itself, but more on kind of where the map node is. Okay. And so really we may need to adjust how the logic for that works, but we'll cross that bridge when we get there, I guess, right? And in fact, let's go ahead and look at our script. So let's go ahead and start working on this update node function here and talk about what it needs to do. Let's just refresh ourselves because I kind of rambled a bit. This gets called automatically when we set the scene if we're in the engine. This is important. So when we're running the game and it instantiates and that value gets set, it's not going to call this. Otherwise, if it did, we would have every map for every room doing this update node functionality when we load the pause menu. And it's going to be a somewhat intensive script, and it probably would cause a hiccup if we did that. Okay, unless your game's really small, then maybe it's not noticeable. I don't know. But we definitely don't want to call this in the game. We're gonna build it so that it's only needed in the editor. And likewise, the update node will get called when we click that button, right? Where do we have the button? Up here, update node action. And so maybe we could change the name to be something different, like update node values or something, but it doesn't matter too much. So let's start by defining a new size inside this function, which is going to be the size that this node needs to be. So this will be a vector2, and I'm actually going to initialize this value as a new vector2 equal to the minimum size of a map, which the one before we do the math, right? So this is 480 by 270. Okay. Oops, that's supposed to be a comma, not a period. Okay, there we go. So we're going to make this new size variable. And then I also want to get a collection or an array of all of our transitions. So I'm going to say transitions, which will be an array. And we actually want to get an array, a collection of those level transition items. Not level script, level transition. Okay. And by default, this will be an empty array. Then this is what we're going to do here. This is where it gets kind of different. So we're going to use some new tools. So there's something that's a resource loader. I want to look at this real quick. And this resource loader is the singleton class that's used to access files. And in particular in here, let's just go ahead and type this in and then we can get it in a quick link. So there's an exists function. Okay. And you can see it wants a file path. Let's go ahead and look at it. Returns whether recognized resource exists for the given path. Interesting, right? So we can check if a scene path, like if that file resource exists in our project. And this is safety so that we don't actually break it. So we're going to say if resource loader exists, and then we can just pass in our linked scene, okay, which is that value that we're going to be setting here. So here we're going to make sure it exists. Then if it does, we can start working. So what we'll do is we're going to create a new packed scene. And what a packed scene is essentially we're going to load this scene into memory, but we're not going to add it to the scene tree or anything like that. So we're going to say packed scene equals resource loader dot load, and then we'll just pass in our linked scene as a packed scene. Okay, now that's not going to make a whole lot of sense if you're kind of new, but essentially we're just taking this resource loader, we're loads the resource at a given path, caching the result for further access. So essentially the goal here is we're going to load up this map, and we're like, we don't really want to put it in the game right now, but we want to access some data from it. That's kind of how I'm treating it anyways. There may be a better way to do this. I don't know, but I think this way is sufficient. Again, now everything that happens in here is something that we don't want to happen when the game is running. Okay, so keep that in mind. So again, this update node only happens in the editor hint. If for some reason you need to call this in game because of modifications you make, you want to avoid doing any of this stuff in the game. Because if you've got 100 levels and you have to load them all up, depending how big those are, that could be a problem, right? So we've got our packed scene. Then there's a potential that this doesn't find it for some reason, doesn't load it. Okay, so we'll just do one more check. So if packed scene, then we know we can access it and manipulate it. And here's where I guess what I said earlier doesn't completely track. I am going to create an instance of it. So I'm going to say instance, and we'll just say packed scene.create instance, because we actually need to, or not create instance, but just instantiate. We do need to access this to get some of the children and like that level bounds, for example, and some other things. So once we've done that, we can say, okay, do we have an instance? If we do, then let's continue working. Now at this point, we can actually grab and access all the things that we need to. So first thing we can do is we can update our label. So we'll say, let's actually make a function for this. We'll say update node label, and we'll pass in the instance. Okay. So let's create this function, and then we'll come back to this later. This instance, I'm going to rename this here. This is technically a scene. So we'll just say it's a node because it will inherit. It'll be some kind of node, right? So then we'll do something. Okay. We can update the label. Then what we're going to do is we're going to iterate over the children. And this is where there's a couple ways we could do this, right? So, but I'm going to check for children and just loop over them. And I'm looking for a couple things. One thing we're looking for are level bounds. Okay, that level bound bounding box. And let's just look at level 2 here as an example. Okay, so this level has a level bounds. And then we've also got level transitions. This particular level has 3. So I also want to find level transitions, but I want to handle them each differently. So if we go back to our script, first we'll check, okay, if C is a level bound. So we'll say if C is level bounds, then we do one thing. L if C is a transition area or level transition, then we can do another thing, right? And then after we handle all this, I'm going to come down here and we're going to queue free this instance. So I'm going to say instance.queueFree. Okay, we got everything we needed from it. We got the label, we got the level bounds and the transition information. And then we'll clear it from our memory. So this should only happen again when you assign something in the editor or when you press that button. So this isn't going to get too crazy or overwhelm Godot too much as long as you follow this practice that I've set up, okay? There's a little bit more code down here that we will do. And in fact, I guess it's going to be at the very root level of this function. Do something. That comment is useful today. Okay. Now, what do we do if it's a level bounds? If it's a level bounds, then we can use that to set the size of the level, because that's what really determines the size. Like if I go to scene 2, everything outside this level bounds doesn't really count as the level, right? Because the player can only see things within that bounds. The camera is going to get restricted to it. So when we find the level bounds, we're going to do this. We're going to say new size equals, and then we can grab our level bounds has width and a height value. So we can say vector2, and then we're just going to grab our width and our height of the level bounds. So we'll say c.width and c.height. Okay. Just to help clarify that, we're getting this width and height right here of this level bounds. Okay. The value that we actually set when we're manipulating this. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So we're going to grab that width and height. That's going to be the new size. And then we're also going to be able to get the offset that we need. So what this offset is, indicator offset, is it's going to show us, like if we look at level 2, this is another good example. If we don't account for the offset, then our math is going to assume that the level bounds and the level starts at 0, 0 here. But ours doesn't, does it? It's over to the left and it's up a bit. Okay, so we want to grab this transform position. This is essentially our offset. So when we go back to our script and look at our map node. So down here, when we have a level bounds, we can set our indicator offset. And we'll just set it equal to this position, okay? Because that's going to give us these values right here. I've still got that level bounds shown. Okay, that's all we need to do if it's a level bounds. Set those values. Now, if it's a level transition, we need to do something different. And this is so different. In fact, we're going to create a function to handle this, but we'll start with, we're add it to our transitions. So we're going to say transitions.append. and we can put C, okay? Remember, we started this little transitions array here. So every time we find a level transition, we're just going to add it to that array. And then we'll handle it down here in the do something area. Okay, I'm trying to keep this section as simple as possible. So hopefully this makes sense so far. We load our level, make sure that it's valid, do a couple checks there, right? Then when we find one that we can instantiate, we'll update our label, grab the size, the offset, and any transitions that exist. Then we're going to get rid of the level. Now we're ready to do more with that data. So the first thing that we can do, let's go ahead and remove this comment. We don't really need it. We can actually set the size of our node now because we have a new size. Now the catch is this size is in actual pixels and we need to scale it down. So we'll say size equals, and we'll get our new size, divide it by our scale factor, and that'll be the size of the map node, okay? Likewise, and actually before we move on, this is going to be able to give us values that have lots of decimals, but in order to keep a nice crisp pixel drawing that I want, because I'm working with pixel art, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to round it. So I'm just going to say size equals size.round. You could do this in one line. This makes it easier to read. Okay, so we'll just round it. Looking at this, returns a new vector with all components rounded to the nearest integer, with halfway cases rounded away from 0, okay? All right, so there we go. We're going to just get a nice little size set. Now, after this, we need to take all of this transition stuff and we need to do stuff with it, right? And we're going to do it in 2 steps. So first, we're going to create the entrance data from it. And what I mean by create entrance data is we're going to populate these. So we're going to say, okay, get all of the offsets for our top, right, bottom, and left entrances, okay? And let's create a function actually to do that. Create entrance data. Please, I hope I'm not losing you guys. This is kind of involved and it took me a while to come up with. I hope it's not too crazy. Okay. Now we're going to create this entrance data from our transition areas that we've gathered, right? So we called those, I keep calling them transition areas. There are level transitions, but these right here. Okay, so when we look at this, this is going to be created from our transitions, which is an array of level transition nodes, just like that, okay? Okay, so right here, we can call create entrance data and pass in our transitions, all right? And then what was the other thing I mentioned? Oh yeah, I guess I didn't mention it, but after we get all of that transition data, then the last thing we can do is create the actual blocks that will display on the node, because this is just going to store some data that we can use. So next we want to create, well, let's see, transition blocks. Okay, we don't need to pass in an argument on this one because we will create it based off of this entrance data that we have. Okay, so I'm just going to come down here and create that new function. There we go. We're getting some warnings because we haven't used the values in these, but we'll come revisit each of these functions. But this is what our update node is going to do. Okay, so after we grab all that, we set our size, create a data set based off of our transitions, and then draw blocks based off of that data set. Very good. Now, still, when we go to our pause menu and look at these, nothing's going to happen. I can trigger that by hitting update node. Actually, something does happen. What's happening here? Let's see. That's got a level. I don't know if this is working yet. I was just clicking for fun, but let's go ahead and actually set one of these. Like this should be scene 2. So if I open level 2 right here, boink. I'd like to get it so that assigning these scenes or clicking update actually functions, because this level shouldn't be the smallest size, should it? It should be totally different, okay? So we need to make sure that it gets through this process. And for some reason, it's not right now, even though I think update node is set up properly. And this button is calling it. And our on scene set should also call that. Okay, so let's investigate that just a little bit. Okay, now looking at this, let's see. Part of the issue is like our update label doesn't have code, so that's not working, right? Our entrance data doesn't have code, so that's not working. But I thought that the size would work, so let's just look at this real quick. We have a new size. We're starting it here. And then we'll set it based on the level bounds if we find one. I don't know if we need to start printing this out to the console or what, but, and then we'll set it here and let's just go ahead and print new size real quick. I'm gonna go ahead and save this. And I'm gonna go back to 2D and let's just select this one and hit update. 480 by 270. Okay, that's not working. So something in our code here is not following through. It's maybe not registering. Okay. Okay, so let's just test. I'm just gonna do the old fashioned way. Let's see if we clear this packed scene. So we'll say has packed scene. Save that. Hit update. Has packed scene. Still has that size down here. So let's move this. We know that worked. Did we create an instance? Has instance maybe, right? Save that. Hit the button. Has instance. Okay. For C and get children. If C is level bounds. This is where we should get the new size. Has level bounds. Save that and click update. Okay. Okay, so we're not finding a level bounds. So why not? Let's inspect our scene. And I guess I'm testing this right now on scene 1. So let's go ahead and open that level. Oh, maybe I've got a problem with my level. Maybe I've got an unforeseen problem with my script. I don't know. Okay, so looking at my level, I do have a level bound node right here. Okay, let's just check this out. This is level bounds. Let's go back to my map node. For C in get children, if C is level bounds. So we should find one. So what's going on here? Let's check this out. Oh, this is a simple error. You'll notice I called get children. We need to do get children on the instance. Duh. That was obvious, Mike. Okay, here we go. Save that. There are always errors and bugs. Okay, now let's click this button again. Let's go back to our pause menu, select our map node, click update. Doink. Ooh, and there we go. Now it resized it. That's nice to see. Very good. Now if I click on this one, it's got level 2 assigned. So if I click update, it also updated accordingly. Now these two don't yet have a level assigned. So I'm going to go ahead and assign the dungeon to this third one here. So I'm going to go to levels. It's under forest. It probably shouldn't be, but level 3 scene. Let's open that. Boom. Resized it. And this is all tracking because these are all the same size level. And then lastly, if we load that save scene, then it should stay small, right? Because that save scene is minimal size. Okay, there we go. So you can see the resize is working. Obviously, some of the other stuff isn't, so we need to go through and flesh out the rest of our functions. Let's start with an easy one. Let's give our brains a little break. Let's update this label. Okay, so we have an update node label function call, and we're just passing in the instance. Okay, so let's go down to this function, and what do we need to do? First, we'll just check if we don't have a label, because in the editor, sometimes we don't have this when we need it, then we can grab a reference to it because it will be there. It should be there. Okay, so this is just going to be equal to, I guess the easiest way to do this would be to come over to our map node scene. Okay, and just grab the label. Boink. Okay, so if we don't have a label, get it. Then what we can do is, I'm going to say just for short T, our text is going to be a string. And we'll set it equal to, I think what we'll do is the scene file path. So we'll say scene.scene file path. Okay. And then we can also go through, and I want to clean this up. We're going to take that file path, but I want to strip it down to essential part of it. So there's stuff that we can remove. Like for example, we'll use this replace function. So t.replace. And what we want to start with is we don't want most of the path to it. So right now, like that includes res : / for our resources, and all of our levels for me are going to be in my levels folder. So I don't need that or that / that follows that. So we'll replace that with just an empty string. And then after that, we don't need the file extension either. So we can say it's kind of the same thing. T equals t.replace, and we'll replace .tscn with an empty string. And then we can go ahead and just set the text. So label Laville dot text. Oh my gosh, you guys cannot type at all today. Equals T. Okay. Now this should be enough for that to work. I'm going to go ahead and go back. Let's go back to our pause menu. Hey, look at that. Actually updated all of our strings. So now we can see that this is forest 01, forest 02, and so on. Okay. That one's bigger than the level, but whatever. These are temporary. They're not going to display in the game. In fact, let's go ahead and run our game at this point and just see what happens. Hey, nice. They retained the color and the size and the position. So that's good. And we didn't have to load the data to get those because we stored all of the stuff to size these, you know, natively in the node itself as the size or the color. I guess the other things that we haven't done yet are the entrances. So we'll do that in the next steps, but that's kind of nice. It's kind of working, right? So we've got a map. It's not dynamic. It's not based on rooms we've visited yet, but it is dynamically sized. So that's good. That's progress. I'll chalk that up as a win. The next thing, I guess, then is let's start working on these entrances. So in order to work on those entrances and the transition areas, we need to first address this create entrance data. Now, this is kind of the biggest function of this one, but not for complexity, just for lines of code, I guess. But essentially, we just need to loop over each level transition and get some data and store it appropriately, right? We've got our entrance data already segmented out by top, right, bottom, and left. Okay, so here's what we'll do. We're going to say for T in transitions. We just loop over them. So if there are none, nothing will happen in this function, which is fine. We're going to start and we're going to determine if they're top, right, bottom, or left based off of their location value that they have. So each level transition has a location, right? In fact, let's just refresh ourselves, right? We've got I'm referring to, oh, there it is. I looked right past it. The location. It's going to be one of these sides, okay? Okay, so if t.location equals, and because we're using this handy enum here, we do need to reference that. So we're going to say if this equals level transition dot side, and now we can access the different sides. So let's start with left. That's easy. Okay. So if it's on the left, then we're going to store. Now remember, our entrances is an array of floats. This is just an offset. Okay. We don't need a position because we know if it's on the top, then it's going to be on the top of that box. We just need to know how far over it is, right? Same with the bottom or left, right? Just how far up or down is it if it's on the left or right. So we'll just do some pretty simple code here. Let's just define an offset, and this is going to be a float. And this line of code is going to look scary and complicated, but it's actually straightforward. So we're just going to define it and assign it right here. And we're going to use this clamp F function so that we have a prettier display. And hopefully I can explain this in a way that is fairly clear as we work through it, okay? But the offset, we're going to clamp a float, and we're going to start with our... Now this is going to be a little bit confusing because what we're doing is, because this transition is on the left, we're going to assume that it's X value on our little node. If we look at our... Like if we look at this map node, right? If the entrance is on the left, we can assume its coordinate. In fact, let's just draw one. Let's say, well, we know we're basically going to be drawing one of these, except it's going to be, let's say it's going to be black and it's going to be smaller, right? So maybe I need to change my anchoring to something like this, okay? So we're going to essentially be drawing a block like this, okay? And so we can assume it's X position. What we don't know necessarily is its Y position, okay? Where is it? This guy right here. We don't know where it is here. So that's what we're going to be determining, okay? So let me delete that weird little color rectangle. And what did I do to break it? I probably shouldn't be editing stuff in there, or I've got this code here that's happening. Okay, so the offset is the offset on that y-axis. Don't worry about the x. So that's why this is going to seem a little bit weird. But what we're going to do is we're going to grab our y size, which we should have already set, right? And what we need to do is we need to add a value based off of the position of this transition, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to grab, and I'm going to put this in parentheses so we can do some math. we're going to start with he, which is the transition dot global position. So we can grab that y-axis. And we want global because we don't know the offset. We don't want to have to be too crazy. But we also need to divide this by the scale factor so that it matches, right? Because we've already done that with our size. Okay, but we need to do one other thing. Because of the way we're going to be positioning these, we're just going to want to get that negative. So we're going to take our global y position, get the opposite of it, and then scale it. Okay, so that's going to be our value right there. Okay, but then we need to clamp it. The reason we want to clamp it is because we've got our border. So I'm just going to look at the map node again. We've got these borders and they're 1 pixel thick, and I want there to be at least 1 pixel down over here. So I just want to make sure that we don't draw like an entrance in the bottom corner, in the corner somewhere where it looks gross, okay? And so we're just going to give it an offset of, or a minimum and maximum of 2 pixels offset. So we're going to say, let's see, 2. And so that'll be the minimum. And then the maximum is going to be size.y, right? That's like how, that's going to be the height, minus 2, right? So that it can either be 2 from the top or 2 from the bottom or something like that, okay? So that's our clamp. What's my error here? Oh, I need a comma. All right, so there's how we're going to calculate the offset. Now the math for this on the right is going to be essentially the same, okay? So what we can do is, the difference is what we're going to do here is we're going to take this offset and we're going to append it to our left entrances. So we're going to say entrances dot underscore left dot append, and we'll add this offset value. Okay, so we found for every entrance, we're going to get a value. Boom. And we're going to do the same for the different orientations, right? So if it's if this location is on the right, then essentially we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to store this in the other entrances underscore right collection. Okay, and this can be an L if, not just an if. The top and the bottom, of course, are going to be similar but different. So let's see, if it's on the top, then our offset is going to be calculated, because now we know it's on the top of our box, but we need an X offset. So we're going to change this to our size. In fact, we don't even need the size here, because this one we can just measure from the left. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Okay, because we use that size because the way things are drawn, right? So for this, we're going to just grab our global position.x, divide it by the scale factor, and then we just change this to an X on this right here. Okay. And that's how we can calculate that offset for top. And it'll be the same for the bottom, but obviously we're just storing it in a different place. So that's stored in the top entrances. And we'll do one more L if. And this is going to be bottom. And this is going to be bottom. Okay. So this code could probably be cleaned up. I'm going to recommend keeping it separate if you're new. If you want to clean it up because you're a code wizard and you like to optimize, then by all means, this can definitely be optimized. But what we've done is we've gone through each transition and stored it in the corresponding array, okay? So that's good. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of show what this does, because we're not drawing it yet. So let's go to our pause menu. And if I select this node and update it, I see that on the right, it has 1. It's got an offset of 3.2. And that's probably all it has, right? Because level 1 only has that 1 transition area. But if we select this map node here, you can see nothing on the top. We've got 1 on the right, 1 on the bottom, and 1 on the left, okay? Now, likewise, this forest will probably have, it's got a top, and then I don't think we added any others, but it could have a right. Yeah, we haven't added any other yet. And then this guy, our save room, should have 1 on the left and right, right? Okay, there we go. So now we've managed to record the locations of these entrances, and then the next step will be to draw them. Okay, so we have this other function down here to create the transition blocks. These are the little black blocks that are going to display the entrances, okay? And this is going to be similar in some ways to what we did here, right? We're going to be kind of checking, except instead of doing a loop over transitions, instead what we can do is we can go to each of our entrance arrays and draw a different style of block depending on which side it's on, right? So first thing we can do is we need to make sure we have, much like we've done here, we need to make sure up here with our label, we need to make sure we have access to this transition blocks node, because we're going to draw them in here. Okay. So I'm going to come up to my script, and down here, we'll just check if not transition blocks, then we can grab a reference to it. Just click and drag it right in there, okay? That way we know we have it. This is pretty important in the editor because there will be circumstances where you won't find it right away. Now that we've got a transition block node identified, whenever we create these transition blocks, we need to remove any that might be there that maybe were already created. So we're going to say for C and get children. Well, not just get, see, I almost did it again. We need to get the children of our transition blocks. There we go. That caused some confusion for me earlier. We're just going to queue free all the blocks that might already be there. Okay, so that we clear it out. And then we can start adding them back in as is required. So we're going to say for T in, we'll start with left entrances, entrances.left. You know, or we could call it E, or I don't know. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to create a block, a little black box, and then we're going to position it accordingly. Now, the thing that we're going to do, though, that's a little bit different is let's actually create one more function, because otherwise creating a color rectangle area and setting it up is going to be a little bit of code. So let's create a function to do that so we don't have to repeat too much. But we'll have an add block function. And actually, this isn't going to return void. We're going to return that color rectangle that we're going to create. Okay, so this variable, let's make a new block variable, not black, but block. And this will be a color rect. I've been recording too long, you guys. My typing is getting worse as I record. So we're going to go color rect.new, and we can go ahead and actually add this block into our transition blocks. Okay, so we'll say transition blocks dot add child, and then we'll just add the block. Why do I keep typing black instead of block? Okay, add the block. And then I want to set a custom minimum size. They have to be at least a pixel on each dimension, right? So let's say block dot custom minimum size. We'll do dot x. Oops, dot x equals 1. Just copy that and make the minimum y equal to 1. And then here we don't pass, we return the block. So we create a block, we actually add it to the tree, but then we return it up so that we can use it further. So up here, what we're going to do is we'll start by creating a new block. So we'll say block, and this can be a color rect, right? Equals add block. Boom. Okay, so we just made this repeatable with one line of code. And then we do need to adjust the size. So if the entrance is on the left, I'm gonna keep the height fixed so that all the entrances have the same size. Essentially, they're going to be 1 pixel by 3 pixels. Okay, and it just depending on the orientation, they'll be a little bit different, right? So we can say block size. In the case of a left entrance, we only need to resize the Y because it's already got a minimum of 1, so the X will be fine. So we'll set the Y size to 3, and then we need to position it. So we're going to say block.position. The X is going to, in this case, it's just going to equal 0 if it's on the left. Okay, that's easy. Block.position.y is actually just going to equal T, because remember what T is? It's actually just an offset. Okay, there we go. So now we've created all of our left entrances with that code. Our other types of entrances are going to be quite similar, right? So we can go over our right entrances. Now the right entrances will have the same Y. The block position is going to be different. Instead of that, it's going to be, we want it to essentially be at the edge, the right side, so we can get the X size. So we'll say self. You don't need self, but it makes it easier to read. Self dot size dot X. And we need to subtract 1 because this X position is where it starts and it's 1 pixel wide, right? So we need to subtract 1. That'll bump it over. Then that 1 pixel thick width will fit over the edge. And then same thing for the Y position, just use T. Okay, let's go ahead and copy this again. Let's do top, create a block. Now in this case, we're not setting the Y to 3, we're gonna set the X equal to 3. And I should actually keep that for a second. For the top, much like the left, the offset is gonna be 0, the one that we can assume. But in this case, it's the Y offset that we can assume. And then the X is the one that equals this value here. And we're almost done. Let's go ahead and copy this. And there we go. Except this needs to be self-size.y -1. Okay, now we have a function to create blocks. If I didn't miss anything, we should be able to come over here to our pause menu. And oh, it's not doing it. Not sure why yet. Let's give this some thought for a second. I'm noticing something that's not the cause of the bug, but is a bug that I had to address. So I've got a lot of right entrances on this, don't I? I should only have 1. What's happening is every time I click update or every time I do that, it seems to be, you know, recording more. I don't know. Something like that. Okay. So you can see now it's got 15 in that array. So let's go into our script. When we update our entrance data, I guess I need to clear it, and I forgot to do that. So let's just go in here, and we need to just clear each entrance type. So we'll do that here. Oh, where'd I go? Where'd I go? Entrance, sure, bottoms first. Let's go ahead and clear. Okay, that fix should help clear up these. Let's come back in here and just hit update several times. Now we should only have, yeah, only 1 on the right. Very good. Go ahead and update these. But we're still not drawing those little guys, are we? So let's look at the code and let's see if there's something we've done wrong. And let's also look at the map node setup. We've got this transition block. I want to make sure he's on full rect. He should, it looks like it is, but set that there. Look at the layout. Okay, full rectangle anchors. Seems good. Okay, let's go ahead and save that. I don't know if that made a difference. Didn't seem to. Still not working there. Oh, actually, you know what? Come to the transition blocks. We never colored those blocks, and I wanted to make it easy. So I missed a step. Let's go over here to visibility, and I'm going to modulate this to black. So if you want your entrance things to be a different color, then you can. Let's see if that fixes it. Oh, there we go. Much better. Okay. So now you can see that we're getting all of these little entrances drawn. I don't know why we got one on the bottom on this node. Is that really correct? I don't think it is, but, and oh, I think we've got a, there should be one on the bottom for forest 2, but not for forest 3. Interesting. Let's look at our code a little bit more. Because these other ones look fine, right? They're left and right entrances. And you can see that there's an offset based on where they're positioned. And so that means there's something a little bit wonky with how our levels are set up. But that's okay. We can adjust these. Now, we may have to come in and do some special math to make sure that we account for the extra space between them. Otherwise, we might need to butt them up against each other like that. And but for now, I'm going to keep it simple and we're just going to eyeball it the best we can. And things should generally connect and line up pretty well. But yeah, let's dig into this. I'm not sure why we got that issue. So I need to inspect. Let's start by looking at forest 2 level. We've got a level transition on the bottom, and it is marked as bottom. And let's go back to pause menu and bottom. Oh, we do have one in there. I wonder if I've got some code issues in here. So let's look at our transition blocks. Oh, okay. That would be a problem. We've got two tops. This one needs to say bottom. Why aren't you guys correcting me while I work? Where is the love? I wish you guys could. I wish you could just shout. I'm sure some of you are shouting through the monitor as I'm doing this. Okay, let's go ahead and look back at the pause screen. Update this one. Okay, that's better. I'm not sure why this one had a bottom though. I think, oh, it was because it was drawing the top one twice. It was drawing it here and then on the bottom because I'd mislabeled that thing. Okay, cool. So now we're drawing our entrances as we expect to see them. Holy crap. Holy crap, Mike. That took forever. Do you guys see what's happening here? Let's run the game and let's see if this works. We're not drawing the transitions. Otherwise, it's working. Okay, so why did we not draw the transitions? That's yet another thing we got to figure out. Probably something else silly that I missed. So let's come back into our map node script and scroll up to the top here. I'm pretty sure there's some, yeah, we need to create our transition blocks. Okay, so this is where it gets kind of weird, and the way I set this up is interesting. Hopefully it seems nice to you guys. When I originally built this system, it did all of this code every time it loaded the pause menu. And I was, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, you can't do this, Mike. That's going to be terrible. I'm going to remove these print statements. We don't need those debug anymore. And so I'm thinking that, and then I realized, okay, some of this, you know, when you do some of the stuff, it wasn't saving and displaying properly. And so I just had to kind of separate certain pieces of the logic and of the building. Setting the size of these works fine, but drawing these entrances was something I had a hard time with. And so I did need to store the data in these arrays like we have, and then draw them here. So that function is create transition blocks. We just need to call that here, because when we run the game, we should have all of this entrance data stored. So now without loading those levels, we can create those transition blocks, right? Let's run it one more time. Bink. There we go. So now those maps are drawing and displaying kind of exactly as we would hope. And I've got a lot of space here. If you, let's say this was my entire game, I could obviously decrease the scale factor, make this a lot larger. But hopefully you guys can see what's kind of cool about this is these map nodes are completely independent of the rest of the scene. They just kind of work, right? They work based off of the linked scene. Now, the last piece that we had to hook up, if you can stand to bear with me and watch it, is how to hook this up to our save and load system and display it only if we've discovered the area. And actually I say the last, but we also need to display where our player is in relation to the current scene. So we got to work on those things. So, but next I want to do this. I want to do the discovered by player. Okay, checking if this scene is discovered by the player is going to be fairly straightforward, but before we can do it, we need to build in a little function into our SaveManager, because this is this global script that has reference to our discovered areas. Okay, so we need to kind of query that and see. We don't want to build too much logic into it, so, or into our map nodes, I should say. Let's just make a new function. I'll go down to the bottom of this SaveManager script. And this function is going to be simple, and it's just going to check, is area discovered, right? And this will return a Boolean, so it'll be just a true or false result. And we're actually going to return if the discovered areas has the name. And so what we need to do though is we need to pass in, we need the scene UID so we can check against it. Okay, so we'll pass in that scene UID as a string, and then we'll just do this discovered area has, and then we can check the scene UID. Okay, so that is pretty straightforward, right? So what this has is it returns true if the array contains the given value and false if it doesn't. Okay. And we store all of our save scenes that we've discovered as UIDs. Okay, so that's all we need in the SaveManager. Let's hop back over to this map node script. The way that this works, you'll notice when we have this export file, when you look at this path, it displays it as a path, but we can toggle it to display as a UID. But you'll notice the hint. It says toggles displaying between path and UID. The UID is the actual value of this property. So even though it displays this scene path, it's actually storing it as the UID. Okay, so that part is kind of handled for us. which makes this next bit even easier. So we'll just say if not, and we're going to check our SaveManager. If not, SaveManager dot is area discovered, and then we just pass in the linked scene here, okay, for this map node. Then we'll say visible equals false. Okay, if you were doing a fog of war system, then it would be the inverse, right? Like if the area was discovered, then you would hide the fog, okay? And then we can do an elif because we might need to do something different here, right? The other thing that we want to do is actually getting into our next step. So let me actually save this for just a second. Let's test this. Let's make sure this works. So when we run our game, I don't have a current scene yet. This is the flaws of some of our systems because we aren't adding that to our save. Oh, we're not adding it ever. That's right. We've skipped a step. We don't actually discover areas yet, do we? I mean, we kind of do. Let's look at we're going to have to look at our SceneManager. So if we go up to, where is SceneManager? Right here. And look at the script. We do handle our stuff, but currently it's kind of just stored here in the current scene. This data is not making it into our save system yet. Now we did add this SceneEntered script in the past that emits the SceneEntered's UID, this signal. And if we search for this here in our SceneManager, then we'll find that I am emitting it here, part of my transition scene function. So once we've loaded the new scene, then I emit its UID, okay? Or once I load it, change it here, I get the UID, then I emit it, okay? So it's pretty straightforward. We just kind of need to store that in our save data at this point, and then it'll be able to hook up to it. So let's go back to our SaveManager, come up here. In our ready function, we're actually going to use this guy for once. We're going to say SceneManager, and then that signal was, I think, SceneEntered, right? .connect. And we'll just make a little function to handle this. So it'll be called, we'll call on SceneEntered, I guess, because that's what the signal is called. Okay. Let's go ahead and create this. Just scroll down to the bottom again. So anytime we enter a scene, our SaveManager needs to compare it and make a decision here, right? That signal emits the scene UID. Okay, so we can count on having that string argument come through, and this just returns void. What does this on SceneEntered do? We're going to do one of two things. We're either going to do nothing if we've already discovered the area, or we're going to add it to our list. So we'll just do a check if discovered areas has the scene UID. Oh, let me spell that properly. How about that? Scene UID. Then we can return. Else we can just add it. So we'll say discovered areas dot append, and then we'll say scene UID, right? Now, in order for this, there is going to be one flaw. Let's run this. We'll show the flaw. This initial scene when we're testing it, it's not emitting. But if I go to the next screen, it should emit that, and it should start reflecting on my map. Okay, cool. It now shows scene 2. If I go back to scene 1, now it shows both of those. Okay. I think we can fix that. Let's go to SceneManager. And you remember we added this to our ready function to make sure that we grab the current scene. We can go ahead and just emit that. Okay. So if I run again, now I should see my starting scene when I test on the map. Very good. Okay. Cool. And likewise, if I come over here, let's test this with our save data, because we've made minimal changes to our save data code. Okay. So this is showing that we've discovered scene 1 and 2. Let's just go over here to the save screen, and let's save our game. And now if we look at our map, we can see the 3 map areas. So if I close it, run it, okay, our map's back to displaying 1. But if I hit F7 and load, hey, look at that. We've got our 3 things up because we've already built in the functionality to save and load the discovered areas. So let's go to our SaveManager, and you can see, let's look at our save game function first. we are taking our discovered areas and we're saving them here. And our load game, we're doing the similar thing where we're assigning our discovered areas based on whatever we find in our save data. And now that we've come full circle and have started adding discovered areas to that array, it will save them and load them, okay? So that's pretty cool, right? Back at our game, I guess let's just test that last scene and make sure that it works. It should. I don't see why it wouldn't, but I've had enough little snags along the way in this one, then why not one more, right? Yay! Okay, we're in the dungeon. Cool. So now that our map system is working with our save and load system, let's do the last bit. It would be nice to show where the player is. Right now, we should be right here at the top of this level, right? So let's hook that up next. Are you guys dizzy yet? Because I know I am. If you are not dizzy, then give yourself a pat on the back. You're special, because holy crap. And I don't even know how long this video is going to be yet, because I'm still recording. And I'm past me, who doesn't know future me's work and what will happen with it. Okay, how to display where the area is and what map we're in. I'm on my SaveManager. I want to go to my map node. So in the map node, we've already done this. I made this an if statement. We don't really need to make it visible true if it has been discovered, because they're visible by default, okay? But we do want to do this. We want to do another elif, and we're going to say SceneManager, and we want to do current scene UID. So here we check the SaveManager to see if we have the scene, whether or not we want to display it. Now, if that condition doesn't pass, right, then that means we do have the scene, so we are displaying it. So the next check is are we in that scene right now? So we're going to just look at this SceneManager current scene UID. I hope this is making sense. I bet you're like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So if that equals the linked scene, right, then we know when we're displaying the map, whichever one of these it returns true for is the scene that the player is currently in, that we're currently on. So we know we can display the indicator on that little map node, right? So I'm just going to put a pass here to get rid of that error for a second. So if we look back at our pause menu, when we're in Forest 2, this check is going to go, okay, have we discovered it? Yeah, the answer is going to be yes. So then it's going to say, okay, well, is that the current scene UID? Each node is going to ask that question, right? Hey, am I the current scene UID? No, am I the current scene UID? This one's going to say yes. All the others are going to say no. Okay, or true or false, right? So then if it is, then instead of pass right here, we'll create yet one more function, the final function, I think, and that's to display player location. Okay, and of course it doesn't exist, so we need to create it at the bottom. Oh, living at the bottom of my list there. Oops, where I hit Control B. I don't know what that does. Maybe nothing. Okay. I got too busy being a weird British muck digger. No offense to British muck diggers. I'm sure you're fine people. Display player location. What are we going to do here? We don't need any arguments, but what we need to do is we need to get a reference to our player and then just position him in there, okay? Which reminds me, I think we left something, little player logic unbuttoned, but we'll go back to that. Okay, so let's see. What does display player location need to do? We need to figure out where our player is within the level. So kind of get player location. And then we need to kind of add a player indicator. There's a few ways we could go about this. But we need to get one in the scene, right? We don't have one currently. And then essentially we just need to position that indicator appropriately within the level or the screen, right? The map location that we're in. So let's go ahead and save this. Now I'm going to just come here to 2D and let's actually just build this player indicator here. And it can be a part of our map. I had built this as a separate scene and instantiated it while I was kind of testing and prepping. So hopefully this works just as well because it should be pretty easy. I'm going to just add a control node to start, okay, right to here. Underneath this control, I'm going to add a texture rectangle. This is the control version of a texture for sprite, right? And really, we maybe could make this, we could probably make this the parent root, but that's okay. I'm going to call this control player indicator. I don't know if I spelled that right. I spelled something. I spelled a word. Okay, player indicator. Access as unique name will be helpful. Now I'm going to go ahead and resize this I kind of don't need it to be big. I'm going to anchor it to the top left. Do I have, what's going on with the transform by default? It's got a size of 40 by 40. Let's just make it 0 by 0. Okay. And then I'm going to move this around. Oops. I'm going to move this around. Doesn't really matter too much where it is. We're just going to position it here. This texture rect is something that we need to configure, and we're going to use my favorite kind of texture. One of them good old gradient texture 2Ds. And this is just going to be a tiny little kind of dot thing that will animate just a little bit. Let's create, well, it's already, I already got the texture set up, dude. Gradient, the size, it can be pretty small. I'm going to make it 5 pixels by 5 pixels. So it's a teensy little guy. Turn this to radial, center that, drag this to the top. Okay. We're going to add a few color stops here. It's going to be white in the center, and then it's going to be kind of like a blue, solid blue, but this is going to be fully transparent actually. Okay. And then we'll put some in-betweens, so maybe at least one. And this is going to be a lighter cyan kind of blue somewhere, and probably no alpha on that one. Okay. So we've got this indicator like this. Now, right now it's being scaled up. It's being scaled up. I don't know why it's being scaled up exactly. Let's minimize this here and look at the layout. It's got a size of 40 by 40, so we can reset that. Now it's 5 by 5. And I'm going to just drag or adjust this position. I don't know, maybe I want 6 by 6. Here, let's change the size to 6 by 6 and then the position to -3 by -3. Okay, so then it's going to be centered here. That'll work. I mean, I guess we could have just kept it 5 by 5 and put the position at -2.5 on both of those. But regardless, there we go. We've got our little indicator. So you can see this guy, we're just going to have to position him in the appropriate location. But before we finish that, though, I do want to add that animation I mentioned. I'm going to use an animation player. We're just going to modulate it a little bit so it kind of slowly flashes. Nothing too fancy. So let's come in here, animation, create a new animation, just call it default, and set it to autoplay. And we're going to, let's see, I'm going to just turn on my snapping to my favorite settings, 0.1, snapping that little guy. I guess 1 second is okay. I'm going to put it to animation looping, this ping pong style, so that it can, with minimal frames, go back and forth. Now with this animation, we'll select our texture rectangle, come down to visibility, and we're going to key the modulate at white. And then I'm just going to come to the end and let's key it again. I'm going to go ahead and change this value after I keyed it. Sometimes I don't like changing it and then keying it because I mess it up. Because I'm goofy like that. So we're going to pick a bluer color. And then we're also going to just maybe fade out the alpha a little bit. So let's check out this animation. Let's play it. I think that looks pretty good. That looks fine. You could do more if you wanted to. You can see that this texture is, it's going to be hard actually to get exactly how we want. Let me go ahead and I'm second guessing myself on how I'm positioning this, but it's going to be okay for now. It's not going to be pixel perfect, but because we're doing a higher res than the actual pixel resolution, it should be okay. But if we need to adjust it, we can. So this animation, it's going to play that by default. I think I'm going to speed it up just a tiny bit, maybe to 0.75 seconds, and then just drag this keyframe in here somewhere. And that's technically, let's make it 0.7. There, it's even. I don't have to do anything crazy. Just a little bit faster, okay? So now that'll hopefully stand out a little bit as we're looking at the map. So this is going to be what indicates where the player is. Okay, so we've got our player indicator. Let's go back into our script here. Oh, not the pause menu script. We want to go into our map node script. Okay, so in here, when we work on positioning the player indicator, we're going to have to get a reference to this, which shouldn't be too hard. But let's go ahead and get started. So first, get player location. We'll start by maybe just getting the player. So I'm going to say vir player. And then we're going to use that, the fun little method of getting the player I've used in this series. So get tree dot get, is it get first node and group? Yeah, there we go. And then the group we're searching for is player. So we've only got one of those. Should work out good. And because I've already deviated and I'm a little bit tired, I'm almost definitely going to make some mistakes here. So bear with me. Now, the next thing is we want to get a reference to this player indicator. So let's just call this I, and it's a control, so we can work with that type, equals, and then what's the best way to find sibling? And I think it's okay to do this in a less efficient manner. Accessing nodes by their name in the scene tree isn't always the most efficient, but it's not terribly inefficient, and this is not something that's happening every frame, so it really doesn't make a difference. So we'll just do this. We'll just use the access the node by its name, so we can put $, and it's already giving me some hints there, isn't it? ... / will go to the parent, and then really we want our player indicator, and I made it accessible by unique name. I wonder if we can use that and if it'll work. I'm going to save this because I didn't get that autocomplete on that. Let's just try dragging this in. Yeah, maybe that'll work, right? Just find the player indicator. It's accessible by unique name within this parent scene. Maybe that'll work fine. I don't normally use this in this manner where it's accessing a sibling. Usually it's referring to a child node. So if this doesn't work, then we'll remove that, or we'll just opt for this alternative path. Okay, but there we go. We're going to grab our player indicator so that we can move it. So we don't need to display it because it's displaying, but we do need to position it. And the positioning of this is a little bit finicky. We got to get it just right in the right spot because we need to position it within the map node that we're looking at, right? So if I go back to my pause menu, if we're in Forest 01, then we need to display it within this box and then position it according to the player's position within the level, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so looking back at the script, let's define a position. I'm going to say POS. This is just a vector 2. And what we can set it to initially is position. Remember, this script is on the map node, and only one of these map nodes is going to run this function, and it's the one that the player is in. Okay, so we'll grab that position, and we'll set that as the position of the indicator. I mean, we will eventually, right? But we're going to calculate its offset as well, and use that to adjust this position. So the next thing we're going to do then is let's get that offset. So position plus equals, we're going to increase it by, and then this is the following code that we're going to write. We're going to put this in parentheses so we can keep the math separate. So the first part of this equation is going to be getting our player dot global position minus the indicator offset divided by the scale factor. We got to include that scale factor because it's little. Okay, so remember how we calculate this indicator offset? How did we calculate that? Did we calculate it? It's up here. It's a variable, right? It's been a couple years since we added this, so let's figure it out. Okay, so if we find a level bounds, we get the offset of that level bounds in relation to the 0, 0 of that world. Okay, so that's what that indicator offset is. And it hasn't been scaled, right? So this is in real world pixel units. Okay, so that's why this works. We just subtract that from this to, make it influence the position. Now we're dividing it by the scale factor so that it crunches it down to that 40th of what it is currently. Then this will kind of generally work. And in fact, let's go ahead and run our game and see if it's working. Okay, yeah, you can see it's here in the bottom left. Let's go ahead and run across the map a little bit and pause it again. Uh-oh, not working. Okay, so that didn't work. Great. What have we done so far? We've got the player global position. I wonder if we're not grabbing it. Let's go ahead and I'm just going to go to the next screen and make sure. There might be a bug related to screen initialization or something goofy. Okay, yeah, no, it's just not working, is it? It's in that same, it looked like it was working for a second because that's where I placed it. I tricked myself. So tricky. Let's move it up here, over here. Now we'll know it's not working, right? Okay. Okay, here we go. Let's go back to our script. I might have missed something. Let's see. Did we ever call display player location? Yeah, here. Okay. Let's do a print. I just got to make sure. Sanity check. Is this happening? I'm going to say display player location, and then let's put the name, I guess. Or no, let's put the linked scene name. Okay, let's try that. So this should run every time we hit the pause menu, right? Okay, display player location. Okay, it is working. It's working on something. Oh, This is funny. I'm calculating the position. I haven't yet assigned it. You guys, come on, wake up, Michael. Let's go I.pos equals POS. Or not I.pos. It's going to be I.position, right? That's the actual. Okay, here we go. Let's go ahead and save that and go back. Now it's looks like it's updated. It's no longer over here. Okay, now let's run across the map a little bit. Hey, look at that. It's updating. This is looking promising. Okay. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to make this full screen so we can see it a little bit better. So you can see I'm in the bottom left of this map. Let's go down. It should be in the top left of that one. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so you can see how it's kind of updating in relation to the player. Seems like it's working pretty good. The only thing I really want to do is kind of clean it up a little bit. So when we're like at the bottom, I don't want it hanging over the edge like that. I want it contained within the map. Okay. So we'll just adjust this position a little bit further and clean it up, pull it away from those edges. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new variable that I'm going to call clamp. This is a vector2. This is going to be what we use to, like, what's the magnitude of this clamping that we want. And so I'm just going to define it as a new vector2 of 4, 4. Now I'm choosing 4 because that's going to bump this in, right, 4 pixels. So we've got 2 pixels, 3 pixels, maybe an extra pixel space for good measure. Okay, so you could adjust this. It could be 3. 3 might work pretty good as well. I'm going to stick with 4. So now that we've defined what that clamp is, we're going to say POS equals POS dot, and then there is a clamp function on vector2. So we'll just use that clamp. Honestly, I used clamp. We probably should use clamp float, but here we go. Let's go position. Well, let's look at this real quick. So what does clamp float do? We pass in the min and the max, okay? And then it'll return us a vector2 that fits within those. So we're going to say our position plus the clamp value is the minimum plus clamp. And then for the maximum, we need to use our size, right? So we're going to do position again, because that's where we're starting from. And then we'll say plus size. That's going to give us the furthest extent, but then we're going to use that clamp value again, this time subtracting it to get it pulled back in. Okay, so I am getting an error. What's the error here? Oh, yeah, no, I can't do clamp F. Bad hint, just clamp. Clamp on a vector2. So I'm going to go ahead and save this and run it again. And now, even though we're in the bottom left corner, you see the player indicator's not going to be sucked over the edge like that. Okay? And I don't know, looking pretty good. Now, on a screen like this where it's basically, you know, just tall enough that this barely fits centered, it's going to always kind of stay in the center. So maybe that's not how you want to do it. You know, maybe you adjust that clamp, like I said, to something like 3. In fact, we could just change that right now and just see what that looks like. If we made this 3 by 3, save it, come back to the game, you can see now I can get further up into the corner, right? And you might want to finesse that a little bit. There's a tiny sliver of a gap right there that doesn't look super ideal, but I mean, for so little work, it's nice, right, that we can just display where our player is in the world. Pretty straightforward and pretty simple. Here I am at the top. In fact, I'm going to keep that 3, that clamp of 3. I know I said I was going to keep my 4 there, but even an old dog can learn a new trick one of these days. Okay, there we go. So what have we done? Have we done everything? We've built a pause screen with an integrated map system. It interfaces with our save and load, right? I can save it and I can load it, and it still will have those map areas that I've discovered. It displays the location of our player. And in addition to that, we've added this system menu, which has very little functionality so far, but it allows us to go back to the title so that we can kind of restart our game if needed. I don't know about you, but I think that's pretty good. I think that's a wrap for this video. Okay, actually, I'm just kidding. There's one stupid thing that we didn't do that relates all the way back to our pause menu. And if you can guess what it is, then I'll give you a virtual high five. The answer is when we go back to title, we wanted to get rid of our player, but technically there is a player there, I think. So let's go look at our remote debugger. Yeah, you can see we've got a player node here. I'm going to guess if we start a new game, or load a game that we're going to end up with 2 players. Sure, let's replace slot 3. Oh, what's that little debug? What am I doing there? Showing what I have selected. Oh, maybe not. Maybe player no worky to make a multiple player. I think, yeah, let's dig into this. Do we have singleton kind of pattern built in? I don't remember. Oh, yeah. If there's already a player, we queue free it. So we're not making a duplicate. That being said, I think I'd like to remove the player when we go back to the title screen. So really quick, let's do this. Let's go back to our message bus system. I don't have it pulled up. We haven't worked on it today. So that's under global messages. And I'm just going to add a new signal. Just put it down here. And I'm not sure what I want to call this. Went back to title, game ended, player removed. Those are in the past tense as if it's happening. Remove player. I'm going to go with something to do with the game. So it's a little bit more generic than just the player, right? Because we don't have to assume that this is affecting only the player. So let's call it something like game ended. I don't know. Game ended? Okay, let's just call this. Ready? Back to title screen. Okay, so back to title screen. I'm going to go ahead and save this. We need to emit the signal. So we can go in our pause menu. We have a function to go back to the main menu. I'm back to title pressed. So right here, let's go messages dot back to title screen dot emit. Just like that. I just realized I left this amount in here. Got to take that out. Okay, so back to title screen. We're emitting this now in the pause menu. Now, any node in the game that might need to respond to this, in our current case, it's the player. We'll say messages dot back to title screen dot connect. And we don't even have to make a function. We can just do queue free. Okay, we can use queue free as a callable in this case. So let's just test this one little fix. System, back to title, boom. And now when we look at a remote, we no longer have a player sitting there. There we go. I think that tied up all of the loose ends that I was thinking about and worried about. This has been a lengthy video, so kudos to you if you stuck around, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy the content. A couple more episodes remaining in Chapter 3 of the Metroidvania Forge. Next up, we're going to be building persistent doors with a switch to open them. So this is going to be another thing that ties into our save and load system with that persistent data dictionary that we've got in there. And we're going to be bringing in some of those assets that are in the pack to make these doors. And then following that, it'll be audio integration. And there's really only 3 episodes, and the final one isn't going to be too big or beefy. It's going to be the exporting project builds, so you can export your game for people to play or test. And that'll be really fun. That hopefully doesn't highlight too many bugs or errors. Sometimes you got a little bug that the game works fine testing in Godot, but then when you export it, suddenly it crashes when you try and play it. You know, weird things like that can and have happened to me for sure in the past. So we'll be covering those things. So I hope you guys are enjoying this. You know, I appreciate those who've stuck with me on this one. My action RPG tutorial series was quite popular, especially that first video. But I put a lot of thought into this one, into the structuring and the order of the chapters and episodes and the things that I'm presenting. And sometimes there's a bit of a delayed gratification that I promise is coming because we've done so little with the player so far. But I'm wanting to make sure that I teach how to build some of the foundational things that I think are often overlooked or under-taught. And so, again, I hope you're appreciating it. Go ahead and give me a like if you are, and drop a comment. Tell me what you like, what you don't like, if you think there's a bug that needs fixed, or maybe just tell me what you're looking forward to next. And of course, if you're new, subscribe so you can see what's coming next. And as always, we'll see you next time.